Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. We're in this series on transitions. I'm super excited. I confirmed a couple of special guests that will be joining me later this month and next month, and I think that they are going to offer some really helpful information as they talk about particular types of transitions. Last week we talked about just in general some of the areas in which we might experience a transition and the overall effects of that. And I shared with you that each week I want to get into something a little bit more specific with regard to transitioning. I think all of us are either going into a transition, possibly in that space of trying to figure out and adjust that middle space, if you will, to being in a transition or learning how to live in a life anew beyond a transition. So I think this is a good series for you, no matter where you are in this journey. I wanted to talk today. So I know a lot has been happening. I feel like I probably say that to you all every week, right? That a lot is going on in the United States and around the world that has people feeling anxious and unsettled and concerned. And I do feel like part of transition sometimes is a space where we just feel lost, lost with the LOST. Um, and we are in that space of not knowing how to move forward, what to do. A lot of confusion that happens during those times, and often they are. We talked about that immediate experience right after a transition, all of the emotions that come, but then also that kind of that middle phase of okay, now what? Recognizing that there are some things that I no longer have access to or that no longer serve me. And so, where does that kind of leave me? And I think it leaves us feeling lost. So, I was talking to one of my clients earlier today. If you are a person who is directionally challenged, you will definitely resonate with this story. So, when I used to live in Memphis, there, much like Atlanta or any other places, basically a circle, right? Circle around the city. So, if you get off on the wrong exit, like it just takes you all around. And if you don't know an area really well, if you know one way to go to get places, then that disruption by you taking the wrong exit can, we're talking about 20, 30 minutes for you to try to get back to the place that you were trying to figure out the north versus the south, and looking at some of the directions on the east versus the west, right? And so in Memphis, one day, I might have not been paying attention. I might have been doubting myself, questioning, like, is it the right one? You know how sometimes, even though you've driven a place multiple times, you question yourself, like, wait, is this the right exit or is the other exit? And because I have a tendency to get lost pretty easily, I think I don't necessarily trust always my ability to discern which direction is the correct direction. Am I remembering the incorrect version, or am I remembering the correct one? So I got off on the wrong exit, and I mean, I'd been driving. You know how you drive so much, like you like half a tank of gas later. And I just was so frustrated and overwhelmed, and I just could not get my bearings. I was very confused. It was getting late, hungry, all of the things. So I get off. Just get off at the first exit that I see, and I pull over because I just was so exasperated at this point. And you know how you feel the tears welling up because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be out here midnight trying to get back home. I just want to get home. And so I remember just saying, "Help me, Holy Spirit." Just how that exasperated cry out for an intervention, like I've done everything I know to do. Like, somebody help me, please. And so I sat for a minute and got myself together, calmed myself down, and I said, okay, let me figure out where I am. And this was pre, good GPS days. So it was back when we were printing off directions, trying to get places. So unless I stopped and asked somebody, which I don't think I felt comfortable doing because I didn't know where I was and I was by myself. So that I just was like, let me just kind of go out and see. And I will tell you that one, when you ask for help, trust and believe that God will give it to you. And two, I will say to you um, that sometimes it is when you surrender and when you stop trying to figure it out on your own, that you realize you're not so lost. Um, but also that sometimes you need to take a moment to breathe. So come out, pull out to I pulled in the parking lot, pull out a little bit to look and kind of look down the street and see where I am. And sure enough, here is an exit sign. Well, I won't say an exit sign. You know how they tell you, hey, this highway is this way, whatever that sign is called. I saw it, go this way to get back to this highway. That was the highway I needed to get to. I didn't know that much. And I was able to get back home. But I say that all to say, right, in this journey of feeling lost, no matter what it is that you're going through, in this journey in being lost, like you are going to experience some confusion. And I think after a transition, confusion makes us very uncomfortable. It makes us very unsettled. It gets us exasperated. We have a hard time being able to calm ourselves down enough to even really kind of think about, okay, let me just take a break. Let me take a breath. Figure out exactly what it is that maybe I'm overwhelmed with in this moment to attend to that. It could be an emotional feeling, right? Like sometimes when you are going through a transition and you're just trying to make sense of it, it can feel like you're so alone in that process. And I think that's part of what feeds our confusion is because we feel like there's nobody in this with me. And particularly if your transition was the person who was your anchor, was your guide, who was your support, who helped you talk through and figure things out, is part of that transition that that person is no longer able to be with you, whether it's a death or a breakup. And so that feeling of loss is lost is the struggle in like I don't have that anchor there. Sometimes when my mother was my anchor, and so sometimes when we lose that anchor, it's almost as if that was your compass. And so now I either don't have a compass or I don't trust the compass because I feel like it's corrupted now. Or maybe I don't feel like I know how to read the compass very accurately because we come to depend on people when they're in our lives because they show up for us. They're there, they help us see things that we don't see. They draw attention to areas where we might not otherwise have been able to see it needed something to be done in it. People have these awesome gifts of being able to problem solve sometimes, and they just look at something and they say, "Hey, do it this way." You've probably been in a situation where you were trying to figure something out, and somebody came along and was like, "Oh, you do it like this," and it was something quick and simple. You're like, "Oh my gosh, really?" And I think when we lose people in our lives or when we have these transitions, it may have been you had a certain amount of money coming in, and now you don't have that money coming in anymore. So now I feel lost because I don't know how I'm going to navigate without having these resources. I know a lot of you are probably in situations where things financially may be shifting in your life. Could be due to a death, could be to a job loss, it could be to people scaling back, and so you're working less. It could be because your money's just not stretching as far as it used to because things are more expensive. It may be that you're caregiving for someone else, and so now you're spending more money, or a health issue, or some unexpected expenses that come just when you don't need them, right? The car, the house, an appliance, and so you're lost in trying to figure out how I didn't budget for this. I planned for this. I'm not in a space to be able to navigate this. And so that confusion comes because I don't feel like I have what I need in order for me to be able to address this situation in this moment. I don't have the skills, I don't have the resources, I don't, maybe emotionally, I don't have the emotional strength. I may not have the cognitive clarity to be able to deal with this. So I feel very confused, and that contributes to me being lost, right? Because confusion often will have you off course. Some of you have thought you were going one direction and realized you were going the wrong way. Like been down on the interstate and realized like I am absolutely going the wrong way. I am 10, 15 miles outside of where I need to be. I need to turn around. And then I feel like because of that confusion in everything that it does in our bodies, that the you may be dealing with, we talked about so many emotions last week, right? Like the anger, it might be sadness, it might be disappointment, it might be um, feeling I think agitated sometimes, like in these transitional spaces. And so because you're at dis-ease or unrest, then it makes it difficult for you to have the clarity of mind to be able to problem solve. So one of the other things that comes along with that feeling of being lost is that I don't feel like I have the capacity to effectively problem solve and utilize strategies that are going to allow me to be able to see a solution. And that, again, that's where the confusion kind of interferes with, clouds our judgment, causes us again not to trust ourselves and our ability to make a good decision. And when we're in states where we don't effectively have the capacity to problem solve, what are we going to do? We're going to fall back into old patterns. Now that old pattern, and I've done this. People have done this to me, where in that frustration, in that confusion, you're lashing out, right? So maybe you're trying to handle some insurance. Maybe you're trying to figure out your housing situation. Maybe you're trying to navigate a bill that you received in the mail unexpectedly. Maybe you're trying to navigate some friendship dynamics, because sometimes when we have particularly like a breakup or a divorce or separation, like the interpersonal dynamics can get very convoluted. Right. So this support system that was my support system, I realized, is either going to choose a side, and that side may not be mine, or they're not going to want to choose a side at all. And so they're going to disperse. I think a lot of times people feel like breakups and divorces and separations are contagious unless they're in a place where they've experienced one. And so people are like, I don't want any parts of that. Like, that seems like a lot of drama. That seems like, and so even the support system that you may typically have to be able to deal with transitions may not be available to you in this moment. And that's contributing to why you're feeling lost as well. And so sometimes because of the limited resources and the lack of support, then the problem solving really becomes more and more tedious. And then when you get emotionally tired and cognitively, just unclear, it definitely can be convoluted. And so when we talk about falling back into those old patterns, one of them is like the irritability, like I'm snapping at people. It may be that you fall back into a pattern of reaching out to someone who you previously stopped having a relationship with. One, because they didn't deserve it, and two, because you recognize you were in different places and this person wasn't necessarily the healthiest person for you to reach out to. And that could be family members as well. Sometimes we realize, like, hey, I don't need to call this particular family member, or some of you may be in situations where all of your family members may think very similar and have similar patterns. That's what you came out of. That was one of your transitions, was I came out of the pattern of dealing with people who were making unhealthy decisions, and I realized that I was unhealthy being around them because it affected my decision making. So you might be in that place of, I've transitioned some of my support system anyway, because I'm realizing they weren't necessarily healthy, but because that's all I know and what I may feel like I have at this moment, then I fall back to them, and then I'm back in that pattern again, of these unhealthy interpersonal dynamics, and the bad advice, and just not great decision making that comes along with being connected to certain people, which is again why sometimes it's important for us to separate ourselves. And I think also part of that is why when we're choosing to romantic relationships, for example, when we're choosing to leave romantic relationships, like we have that pattern of on again and off again. And that pattern can end up lasting years because in that period of distress, in my period of feeling lost, in my spaces of confusion, in my inability to be able to problem solve, then I'm going to go back to this person because they do have a tendency to feel it in the atmosphere when you're feeling vulnerable or unsettled or struggling with something. So they'll reach back out, and you think, right, oh, this timing is perfect. And maybe this is the answer to my prayer. And then so like you forget all of the reasons why you stopped talking to them in the first place and why they weren't healthy and not good for you. And then you're back in that cycle again. And then you find yourself like, oh, yeah, now I remember why we didn't work out. And I think that leads to us feeling trapped. And so that's another part of this scenario of feeling lost sometimes is that we feel trapped in what our options are. And sometimes we're just in these periods of transitions where we don't like the space we're in. Now, we may not like the space we're in because it's a healthier space, which can be very uncomfortable for us if we're used to being in unhealthy spaces. Sometimes we get used to chaos. Sometimes we get used to the excitement of being in situations that may be a little bit more impulsive. And we say, oh, you know what, that was a fun relationship, or that was I was enjoying myself during that time, even though I might have been doing some reckless things and not making really good decisions because it made me feel alive. And so now I'm in this situation where I'm trying to make these healthy changes, and it feels boring, right? And sometimes we struggle with being in spaces that feel boring compared to the spaces where we felt like we had more excitement, even though the cost to maintain that excitement was really, really high. And so, sometimes we're in those spaces of we almost feel numb when it's really like normal, but it's boring. Um, because honestly, everyday life is tedious, right? So you are doing likely very similar things from day to day, getting up, getting dressed, showering, going to work, right? Like, so you may feel like you're on that rinse and repeat and looking for something to disrupt it. And because I'm in this place of feeling lost, and then I'm in a space of confusion, and I'm struggling with trying to figure out some healthy ways to be able to navigate this, or maybe I don't even have the skills to be able to navigate that, right? And so now I'm going back to the impulsive patterns, to the things that are going to give me some sense of excitement, shake it up a little bit, or maybe I'm going to disengage, and then I start not taking care of my responsibilities, not taking care of myself. Then it's showing up on my job, it's showing up in my relationships, it's showing up in how I'm presenting myself. And I think oftentimes when we're in that space, there's a wee bit of identity confusion too that comes along with that. Is that I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am in this transition. I don't know who I am mid transition. Because post transition, when we're in the place of being able to move forward, that means we've accepted an identity and moved in a space, and it feels more congruent to us. So this is this in between space. It might be right after, and I'm still adjusting to this transition. Maybe hoping that I don't have to stay in this transition, that I can go back to the place that was familiar and comfortable for me, because we tend to again want to align ourselves so that we're in spaces of comfort, even if it means we have to change our cognition so they match the experience, which is a lot of times why we will pretend something is really different than it actually is. That pretty lie that we like. I think the other part that comes along with this feeling lost, confused, struggling to be able to problem solve effectively, living in the space of not making the great decisions, falling back into old patterns, not really knowing who I am and my identity, and really struggling with the discomfort of that, not even knowing where to start to understand who I am, because so much of my identity might have been built on whatever it was I lost during this transition, whether it was work or a relationship or a parent, or income level, or a home, or abilities that I no longer have, a title that I no longer have, and so I'm really struggling. But what it also does is it leads to us not being able to fully trust ourselves in this journey of figuring it out. So then we start like numbing. So here's the other side of it. Like sometimes I feel numb and I'm trying to do something not to feel numb. But then on the other piece of it is I feel everything very intensely. And so I am trying to numb it so I don't feel it, right? The discomfort that comes along with this feeling loss. Like I told you, I was exasperated, I was overwhelmed, tearful, desperate, probably, honestly, at probably minute 25 in that journey. The desperation and the hopelessness starts kind of setting in, right? Because we know that oftentimes whatever we feed grows. And so now I'm feeding like, hey, not only are you lost, but you don't know how to get unlost. The options that I'm looking at don't feel either safe or don't feel realistic or don't necessarily lend themselves to me feeling comfortable. For whatever reason. And so, like, now again, box myself in the feeling trapped piece. I don't feel like I have any other options, which also contributes to us feeling more lost. But it sets me up to like, hey, I like avoidance. The avoidance based behaviors will kick in when you feel lost because you don't want to have to deal with it. You don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want to have to try to figure it out. You want to, right, that put my head under the covers, and or drink or smoke or um, drown my sorrows in a an interaction with someone that basically is a transactional kind of interaction, just because it distracts me temporarily. And so, why are these things dangerous? I think for a lot of reasons. One, I tell you all the time, whatever you practice becomes your process. And when you're living in the space of operating out of feeling lost and confused and uncertain and not trusting yourself and falling back into patterns that are unhealthy, then you're going to keep up whatever cycle it is that causes you to be on this perpetual loop. Now, one of the things that I encourage people to do whenever they're in a space of feeling lost is exactly what I shared with you all. Sometimes you got to sit and be still, right? So if we're talking about, okay, Tarver, well, you told me what I'm doing that may not necessarily be conducive to helping me through this transition. What do I need to do to be able to help myself through this transition? Be still. Right? I know that we do not like sometimes places of calmness and places of stillness because it means we have to sit with emotions, which we are again trying to avoid. They're uncomfortable. Don't want to have to feel this pain. I don't want to feel the LOS S loss. I want to be able to kind of push that away, and in doing so, sometimes we never really develop the emotional regulation skills that we need. You have to be able to identify and label different emotional states in order for you to be able to understand how to navigate them. There are certain emotions that bring up physical sensations in our body, and we need to ground ourselves, calm ourselves, relax ourselves in order for us to be able to effectively communicate what we need in those spaces. And oftentimes, while we're choosing things that won't necessarily actually meet a need, it's because we don't understand what the need is. Sometimes in my space of being lost, I need someone to be able to hold me, right? Like that literal feeling of safety. I People don't necessarily understand the impact of touch and human connection, and not that you need to be seeking that from people who are unhealthy, but there are people that care about you. There are people, it may be in a faith-based institution, there may be co-workers, there may be friends, there may be family members. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to even know what it is, but sometimes that embrace of just being held makes you feel safe and secure, as we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And sometimes it's just important for us to feel safe. And so because transitions make us feel unsafe, then as we're looking for the things that allow us to feel safe, that human connection could be one of those things, right? And we want to make sure that we're getting that from again, a person who is able to offer that support without a reciprocal cost, because in that moment you're probably not going to be able to give much because you're exasperated, right? And so people just understanding that that's their role, is to help be able to ground you in a way through physical touch. I do think it's also important for us to understand that in order for you to be able to problem solve effectively, you have to first be able to recognize what is an effective solution. Sometimes we're utilizing less effective things because that's all we know, right? That's all that's in my toolbox, are the things that I've been doing before. And even though they don't work, I tell you all the time, even a clock with no batteries is right twice a day, because they sometimes can work or look like they work. Whether it's effective or able to be maintained, then I'll keep going back to them. However, whenever we're in situations where we're distressed, often those less effective behavioral solutions are going to end up causing us the additional problems. So it's important for us to be able to identify what healthy options are. What would a solution look like in a variety of situations? And so that way, when something comes up, I now am able to have the deck here, right? So even if I am just adding things to it that I don't use, but I recognize that they're healthy and how that they potentially can allow me to get grounded and focus and problem solve when I'm feeling lost, then I have them there. One of the things that happens is when a crisis comes up, you are not going to necessarily be in a place to think very clearly, right? Which is oftentimes why we're making very impulsive decisions. I tell people, when you're emotionally overwhelmed, that is not the time for you to make a decision. So in this bag of tricks, in addition to me recognizing that, first I need to ground myself and calm myself and be able to feel safe and secure and know that I have time, right? Sometimes we feel like I got to make a decision right now. But I don't. I have time to take and decompress and breathe and deconstruct and think about my options before I make a decision. So that way I don't feel like now I got to make another decision because that one wasn't a good one because I made it when I was overwhelmed. Right. And it's also important for us to know of the potential consequences of solutions. Sometimes we choose things because we're not in a situation where we have a lot of great options. And sometimes in life, you will be in situations where you don't have a lot of great options. And so to be able to navigate through this experience of feeling lost, I may not have great options, right? Because eventually, if I had not been able to find my way back, I was going to have to stop in one of them sketchy areas, stop at a gas station, and get some directions from somebody, right? I was going to have to figure some things out and go to a store, something, well lit area, and figure out how you're going to be able to navigate. But there would have been those options available had I needed them, and I definitely have utilized it before. And so in being able to understand, hey, let me find the least sketchy option, then I can still be able to navigate through this situation, even if they're not great options. Sometimes you do have to pick something temporary in order for you to be able to buy yourself some time to get to a longer term solution. I know some of you have been in positions like this where you've just had to, like, hey, I'm just going to have to take this job because it's going to get me out of a much worse situation, even though this job isn't necessarily where I want to go. It's not necessarily the place that I would want to transition to, but it's the place that's probably my best option right now until I get a future option that's a better option. Sometimes you've been in situations where you've had to move and you're like, okay, these lodging situations aren't necessarily my top picks, but I can find something that's safe and that I can make work in the short term until I can get to a longer term option. You may be in a position where you're saving up for something, right? So you're in a period of transition because you don't necessarily have the finances to do it right now. You might want to move, but you don't have the money to do that right now. You might need a new vehicle, but you don't have the money to do that right now. You might have um, some challenges with your credit, but you can't fix all of that right now. So you have to bit by bit to be able to work toward that goal. And that's part of those behavioral solutions that are healthy. So short term, let me figure out what that's going to look like. I need to adjust my budget because now I have less to be able to live on. Let me figure out what that's going to look like. Having to get a second job. I know a lot of people are in spaces where they're either working overtime or they've gotten a second job just to be able to make those ends meet, or because you have some goals that you're trying to work toward, to put yourself in a position where you won't have to be financially struggling, right? Some short term things, but good behavioral solutions as options because they move you toward that goal. These skills are really important, and it's important to practice them when you're not in distress. It's important for you to understand what your resources are before you actually need them. You don't want to wait until you're in a situation to try to figure out, okay, where am I going to get, insert caregiver information from, insert, I need some legal advice from, insert, now I've got to figure out how I'm going to manage the financial situation that I find myself in, right? So you want to know what resources are out there, and in a contact, so that when you're in a space where you need it, again, got the tools here. So as I'm trying to calm myself down when I'm feeling lost, I know there's a safe place that I can go, because again, that safety is really important to be able to help me navigate through these things. I do think it's important for us to understand that certain emotions trigger stronger hyperarousal, right? Like get us all amped up, get us worked up, which contributes to the feeling lost and confused, and right. So rejection is at the top of that list. When you feel as if you've reached out to somebody and they haven't been able to come through, or you invest in these people and spend time with these people and show up for these people, but they, like, kind of kick you to the curb when they've got other people around them. You're not as important when they've got other things to do. When you are applying for these jobs and you're not getting any callbacks, you're not getting any interviews, you're not necessarily getting kind of the salary ranges, or the recommendations for jobs that you may want. I think also feeling like we failed, feeling like you failed in that relationship, feeling like you failed in terms of your career, feeling like you failed in terms of where you are at this point in your life right now. Like, why haven't I achieved this goal? Why am I still in this place of struggling with the same things I've been struggling with for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years? But also, I think just boredom, right? Like we were talking about earlier, how sometimes life can feel very mundane and you can feel trapped. And sometimes in that feeling bored, like you also have big emotional responses to that. And it's important for us to understand not only how we're affected by certain emotions, but also how to be able to manage them and decrease them to a point where they're not affecting us in such a high rate, right? This is what we call distress tolerance. We have to learn how to deal with things that are uncomfortable, because when we learn how to deal with distress, that means that we're going to be less impulsive. That means we're going to be less likely to make those poor decisions. And I think sometimes what are some ways to get there? I mean, hey, you told me I need to learn how to manage these things and cope and calm down, but like, what does that look like? I still feel lost. Sometimes it is that we need to practice just delaying our responses. So if you are a person who, as your coping mechanism, impulsively buys things, delay that. Like, this stuff has to sit in this cart for 48 hours before I can make a purchase. I gotta turn all the hangers in my closet before I go out and buy anything new. I can go and look around, but I can't purchase anything. All I can do is write down the things that I want, the cost of them, and then I have to come back and do a look at my budget and determine what do I have that I can spend on this, and I also have to go and look and see if I have anything similar to that already in my house. And why delay? And it's the same thing with food. Even if you distract yourself, you're like, oh, I'm gonna go emotionally eat. Oftentimes, if you distract yourself, just delay it, then it passes, because that is one of the things that we understand about emotional reactions is they pass. But often what ends up happening is we don't give them an opportunity to pass, and we keep feeding them, and we keep causing ourselves more distress because we're not doing anything to calm ourselves down in the meantime. And so then I get to a point where like I'm compelled to do it, and now here I am engaging in this process. Mindfulness is really a great skill, and I think that um, it feels really hard to people because anything new is going to feel really difficult. But the things about mindfulness that are really important, one is like you learn to accept yourself in the spaces that you're in without judgment. That you give yourself compassion. That you understand that times are tough and sometimes I'm not going to always make the best decision. Um, because what it does is it allows you to reduce your feelings of shame and your feelings of inadequacy, which often fuel all of the things we've just been talking about. So when I say take that break, ground yourself, calm yourself, soothe yourself, it allows you to be able to understand yourself, connect to yourself, accept yourself, and better regulate yourself. And again, we talked about a hug being grounding, but music can be a very grounding. Water can be very grounding. Um, Listening to inspirational things, um, getting a good word, reading something that's affirming. And this is why, I talk a lot to people about journaling because sometimes, even if you go back and look how you came out of something before, you've been through a transition before now. If I go back and look at how I came out of that previous transition, that may allow me to be able to navigate this current transition. And it's important for you to pay attention to your body, how you feel in your body, where you carry your stress in your body, being able to really focus. Sometimes we have to focus breath. Sometimes we have to focus progressive muscle relaxation, just tensing and relaxing and letting some things kind of pass through us and wash over us and be released because we're carrying it tight and heavy. And all that intentionality does is it causes you to be focusing in your present moment, right? That's part of what mindfulness is about. Like if I'm staying present in this moment, attending to my needs in the right now, it often stops feeding the anxiety of the unknown and the uncertainty and the confusion and the feeling lost, right? Because it allows me to be able to recognize I have control over this moment right now, to be in this space, to be present right now. And that in itself can be very grounding. So I understand that in the transitions you're in your life right now, those that are yet to come for you, that being able to understand how you feel is an important part of navigating through, but also being able to understand what to do with those feelings. So then you don't get to the place of feeling lost or trapped or overwhelmed or as if you can't make a good decision, stuck, impulsive, or helpless, right? Or hopeless, and sometimes even worthless. And so in this journey, um, of becoming the best you that you can become. Um, Practice self compassion, practice being able to connect to, understand, and navigate your emotions as opposed to avoiding, numbing, or dismissing them. Find safe spaces, find things that allow you to be anchored and rooted and grounded, whether that's your spirituality or an ancestor or some mantras. And then also make space for yourself to stop, take a step back, and practice being present in the space of not trying to focus on, not trying to fix, not trying to overcome, just in being. You will find sometimes if you just take a step back, stop, and breathe, you'll realize that you weren't so lost after all. Okay, be well.